Bill Thomas serves as managing principal of Centric Performance, a specialized consulting firm established in 2001. The firm helps companies sharpen the customer focus of their growth strategies, build the capabilities needed to execute those strategies, and shape the cultures needed to sustain them. Bill has more than 30 years of experience in strategy implementation, performance improvement, and change management. Prior to forming Centric Performance, he held national and global management roles with PricewaterhouseCoopers and Dell Computers. His work has been featured in CEO Magazine, Human Resources Executive Magazine, and other leading publications. Soundview is very pleased to welcome the co-author of Anticipate, Knowing What Customers Need Before They Do, Mr. Bill Thomas. Bill, welcome to Soundview Live.
Thank you, Andrew, and hello to everybody on the line. I wanted to just kind of give you a real quick context, building on Andrew's opening comments there. I actually spent the first 15 years of my career in fairly traditional human resources and organizational effectiveness roles, and then was asked to co-lead the company's customer excellence effort. No prior experience in customer excellence at that point, not even sure what the business drivers were, just saw it as a real compliment and confidence in me, so I, like a good soldier, said, sure, I'd be happy to do it. Just as I began the role in the Customer Excellence Initiative there, one of the senior executives took me out for lunch one day, and could tell he wasn't really wild about this initiative overall, but he said, Bill, let me give you some advice. And I wanted to start off today with you all mentioning that advice because it's really served me well in so many situations over the years. And here's what this senior leader said to me. He said, you know, Bill, the world is not lacking for smart people. They're everywhere. And it's really not lacking for visionary leaders. Though there aren't as many visionary leaders out there as there are smart people, there are plenty of visionaries out there as well. But what the business world is lacking are leaders who can consistently execute a vision or plan. And then he went on to say, you know, building the organization and capabilities you need to execute and the culture it takes to sustain it are the real skills that the business world is missing right now. That, Bill, is what you will need to bring to this customer-focused effort of ours. And then he ended by saying, without the driving capabilities and culture, your initiative is going to become an initiative du jour instead of one that endures. And we really need it to succeed. So two things that did, that really created a huge expectation that I knew was laying out there for me. But the second thing it did is his comments about execution, customer focus, capabilities, and culture really resonated well with me. And it pretty much shaped the next 20 years of my career, and that's what we tried to capture in this book. We wanted to really capture our experience and the lessons we've learned along the way in all three of those aspects: customer-focused strategy, capabilities, and culture. So that's kind of the framework for today. And before I get started, I wanted to just mention one other thing about the book that kind of differentiates it from a lot of the other works out there. There is a lot of great work out there, and there are a lot of great thought leaders out there in this whole area of customer experience management and customer focus. But where we really feel our book is different is it's more than discrete activities or pieces of the puzzle. You know, there's a lot of great work out there on customer satisfaction and NPS and customer effort scores, and then different social media and channel nuances, you know, text, voice analytics. But all of those things are part of Voice of a Customer initiative. And to us, the Voice of a Customer initiative is just one piece. It's a very key piece. It's a key foundational piece, but it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle of this focus that we call customer experience management. So that's the first kind of the first difference. The second one is that it really looks at the entire journey. You know, we're looking at over 2 decades. Jeff, my co-author, and I always tell each other between the two of us we're over 100 years old. But we've really got 40 years of experience working with this. And it's been experience that's been with companies in both their efforts to design and implement their customer-focused strategies over time. So what this book presents is their learnings, some of which were good ones and some of which were bad ones, of trying to implement customer focus and customer-centric strategies both inside their companies or organizations and outside in the marketplace. So that's kind of the second difference, is it really maps this overall extended period of time. The third piece is that the end game for us isn't about happy customers. This is not an initiative that's for the customer's sake. It's an initiative that's for the sake of better business results. And hopefully that translates into better financial results for both us, our companies being the supplier or the provider or the vendor, and also the financial results for the customer. So this isn't about happy customers. I say at the top of that slide, it's not about smiley faces. All the happiness and all the smiles and all the goodwill in the world is meaningless if it doesn't translate into some solid financial gains for us and for our customers. So just a couple key differences before I start getting into the actual gist of the book here. The whole book is built on a model called the Customer Focused Maturity Model. And we'll build this model as we go through the next 35 or 40 minutes here together today. But it's really defined or portrayed by 4 different dimensions, and you see 2 of them here on this next slide. The one dimension going across the bottom horizontally there is the supplier's approach to the entire relationship. The vertical dimension on the left is the customer's view of the value they receive from that relationship. And the whole approach is designed to create mutual profitability for both sides. So the supplier's in this to make money, the customer's in this to make money, and it's not a win-lose situation where one of us makes money while the other one loses. But we really want a relationship at level 3 of this model that translates into mutual profitability. So it's really a win-win in terms of financial results for both of us. So if you just kind of followed across that bottom, that supplier's approach, what the journey does is it tries to move our approach or our focus on our customers from one of looking at customer behavior and reacting to that behavior to one of satisfaction and drivers of satisfaction to what really separates satisfaction from a loyal customer and what that means to us. And we'll kind of return to that in a second here. And the journey also tries to eventually build on and raise the customer's view of what we bring to the table. So we want them looking on us as much more than a transaction, much more than a point of sale or a point of service. We'd really rather them looking at their total experience with us, which many of them do. But more than that, we want them to see us as a value-add supplier, not just another supplier that they go out and shop around and put in competition with other possibilities. So that's sort of the first 2 dimensions of the model and how it maps over time, moving the customer's view of us from a transaction to the total experience to value-added supplier, and moving our approach from one of focusing on customer behavior to their satisfaction to their loyalty. And let's just look briefly at how we define loyalty. You can get 30 people in the room and probably come up with 30 different perspectives and definitions around what customer loyalty looks like. But for the purposes of all of our work, this is pretty much the definition that we've gelled around in the past 20 plus years of working with this. Characteristics of a loyal customer: 1 is that they buy consistently, if not exclusively, from you. So this actually goes beyond brand preference and gets into a brand insistence. Second characteristic is they tend to be an early adapter of new offerings. So the sales cycle, the selling costs, the uptake of new products and services that you're moving into the marketplace or into a channel tends to be a lot quicker and a lot less expensive with loyal customers. They tend to be less price sensitive because they've been with you long enough to know that you're going to give them the value at the end of the day that's a little extra from what the typical other transactionary vendors and suppliers are going to give them. 4 is they frequently recommend you to others, so that's the whole referral power that we talk about. And the last one is that they actively promote your brand. And the key word there is actively for us. We're talking about customers who go out of their way to talk favorably about you, not just customers who will have a good thing to say about you when they're asked, but We want loyal customers who are going to go out of their way to say great things about you. Got ahead over here. All right, so there's two other dimensions here to finish out the, my mouse is moving quick. Two other dimensions here just to kind of finish out the framework of the model for you. At the top of this next slide is the third dimension that we call value connections. And that's simply the types of connections a supplier organization uses or leverages to create customer value and to differentiate themselves in the marketplace. And then the final dimension on the far right-hand side there is called the maturity level. And that actually demonstrates or represents the supplier's maturity in terms of their ability to leverage the relationships at those various connection points. So we're building along on this model as we go, but just to kind of give you a very introductory overview, those are the four dimensions of the model. The levels, we call them level 1, 2, and 3 of maturity. Level 1 is what we call our detect and correct level. And what the supplier is really trying to do there is detect and correct either the unmet customer needs or existing customer issues. Level 2 is what we call define and deliver. And at that level, the supplier's focus is to define and deliver what customer value means to the customer at every touch point of the experience, not just the point of sale, not just the point of service or complaint, but at every touch point of the experience. And we'll see just how numerous those touch points are in a minute or two here. And then the third level is what we call drive and capitalize. And what we mean there is to drive your value-creating culture throughout your entire company, throughout your entire organization. So all business units, all product lines, all channels, all geographies, but to drive your culture through the entire end-to-end business, and also to leverage it throughout your entire value chain, not just your customers, but beyond your immediate customer base and into your broader value chain. Again, we'll talk about pieces of that again in a little bit. So as an organization moves through these various levels of the maturity model, what we've found over the years is that there really simply needs to be a focus on 10 key elements if a supplier or provider company really is going to optimize the profitability of their customer base. And some of these elements come into play at different times. Some companies get better at them sooner than they get good at the others. But generally, they have to be experiencing some level of effectiveness in all 10 of these. And they pretty much follow this order. So the first two, strategic drivers and customer segmentation, and we'll talk about each of these a little bit further in a few minutes here, but 1 and 2 basically refer to doing the right things, but doing them for the wrong reasons and with the wrong customers. That's why strategic context and segmenting your customer base comes into play at the very early stages here. 3 and 4 is the engagement level, and our whole purpose here is to go beyond input and feedback and move into substantive dialogues with our customers at all levels. And that calls for a unique kind of customer and employee engagement that some companies aren't yet good at, and many companies don't yet recognize the need or the value in doing. Training and tools and process orientation both refer to the skills and the support and the structure that an organization needs to drive that deeper level of customer engagement. Joint workouts is pretty much the turning point. It's the inflection point in our view. It's where we see a company that is already reasonably mature because they have solid relationships with customers, solid enough that they can actually sit down together and work out problems. The relationship is very mature. Both sides believe there's nothing we shouldn't be able to sit down and talk about if it's important enough to both of us. But the joint workout process kind of moves their relationship from that problem-solving joint process to a forward-looking joint process, which is the whole anticipatory, what's coming down the pike, what my future needs might be that neither one of us are thinking about right now. Capacity for change is a key one. I think every day some company somewhere in the world launches their customer focus or customer's number one kind of priority or initiative. And while a lot of their employees and managers intellectually get it, they don't embrace it, and they certainly don't demonstrate it. So there's a lot of resistance that can come out of a company's efforts to take their customer focus to the next level, and change management becomes very, very pivotal. Then the last two pieces are kind of related. Number 9 is consequences. If you really want to get to level 3, which is evidenced by a culture that really puts the customer first in all respects, both inside and outside of the company, then there simply needs to be consequences. There needs to be consequences for people who support the effort, and there needs to be consequences for people who don't support the effort. And we'll talk just a little bit more about that, but there is a lot of detail in the book around how to provide both kinds of consequences. And then the last one is committed leadership. And I think a lot of people sort of raise their eyebrows at us when we put this one as number 10. And the only reason we have it as number 10 is it's pretty much the master or the uber element of all 10 of these. You need a committed leadership to start this whole process going, and you need a committed leadership structure and mentality to keep the process going. So if anything, committed leadership sort of goes through all of the other 9. It's not last because it actually happens last. Just very generally and very loosely, these 10 elements track or map to the evolution along the customer maturity model the way you see them there. So levels 1, 2, and 3 are pretty much level 1. Elements 1, 2, and 3 are pretty much level 1. 4 and 5 and 6 and part of 7 are level 2, and so on. And one question we often get, almost always get, is how long does it take to really get to level 3? And the hard and uncomfortable answer to that is it really depends. And it depends on 2 things. First, it depends on how quickly a company recognizes that they need all 10 of these pieces and how quickly they are at developing and getting good at all 10 of them. And then the second thing the time question depends on is how long is it going to take them to align these to each other and then to align them with the rest of the business. So it really does vary on how long it takes. So let's kind of take a look at each one of these in a little more detail here. Element 1, strategic drivers. The strategic context needs to be very clear and very compelling. I think a good way to kind of help you understand what we're driving at on this one is there was a Business Times survey that was conducted up in the Northeast region not too long ago. And it surveyed 750 CEOs of various types and sizes of companies. And one of the questions in the survey was, what do you as a CEO see as your top challenge for business growth in the coming year or 2? So what do you see as the top challenge for business growth in the coming year or 2? Out of the responding CEOs, over 2/3 of them said their top challenge for business growth was generating demand for their products and services. And we sat back and we kind of scratched our head on that one and said, they couldn't be missing the mark any more than they are. That's part of the problem with a lot of growth strategies is that they start off with our existing products and services. And then they sit there and figure out ways to make our customers want more of them. So basically it becomes a solution, and we spend our strategy trying to convince customers that they have a problem for that solution. And it's really the backwards, the opposite way of doing it. The real question ought to be, what needs do our customers have out there, or what needs do our customers anticipate that the supplier market isn't yet meeting? So instead of saying, I have a great hammer, it's really cool, we built it, we love it, let's convince the customer that they have a nail that it needs to pound. What's the next nail going to look like? And that's a fundamental change in the way a lot of companies approach their strategy. So the first key element there is there needs to be that connection in a real way to strategy. The second key element, customer segmentation. When you see the kind of techniques and the kind of results we're going to suggest and we're going to document for you that these companies use in levels 2 and 3, it's a lot of work. The rewards are there. They're unquestionably powerful and compelling rewards, but it takes a lot of work. And one of the things that a lot of organizations kind of step back and get scared about is we can't do that for all of our customers. And we agree. We agree totally. We do think that level one, which primarily is voice to the customer, needs to be done and should be done and has value being done for the entire customer base with very few exceptions. Level two, however, should only be approached for a selected number of customers. And level three should be approached for even a smaller subset of that sub-selection of customers. So this isn't intended. Level two and level three is not intended for your entire customer base. So you need some way of segmenting your customers. And there's a fair amount of detail in the book that walks you through different ways that companies have done that. There's also a tool in the book, and it's given a fair amount of attention in the book that tells you what these terms mean on the left side there, and what the measurements and how the metric system was developed and how you come up with some conclusions. But basically this is one of many tools that are out there that help you prioritize which customers out of your entire base are really worth taking to level two, which ones do you think you stand the best chance of closing the gap, and which ones have the most economic gain for you to take them to level two, and then same kinds of questions for level three. So I think this tool that's in the book can be very, very helpful for a lot of folks. Okay, so we've got the first two, which are really two fundamental underpinnings for the whole approach here. Realizing that our true goal is profit growth, not happy customers, but profit growth. And that the path to that profit growth goes right through the experience that a selected group of our customers have with us. Let's take a look at the steps many companies take of taking that customer's experience and that customer's focus up a notch or up a level. First level, as I mentioned earlier, is the detect level, level one. This is pretty much any company that's starting for the first time on trying to show and demonstrate a crisper, sharper, more committed focus to the customers is going to start with some kind of voice of the customer effort or initiative. So voice of the customer, I think most people on the line are generally familiar with it. We're not going to go into detail on the call here about what it is, but it's basically the various steps to solicit, encourage, use, and measure customer feedback. So in a nutshell, voice of the customer efforts, techniques, level one efforts and techniques are intended to detect your risks that you have with your customer. Hopefully in a way to recover from those risks, to stop the risks from recurring, to make sure you've recovered from the problems, things that have caused your customers to be unsatisfied, unhappy, breakdowns in product, breakdowns in service, and so on. But that's basically level one. And it can be very, very helpful. It can be very useful. It's great to cover large populations because whether you're using surveys or focus groups or interviews or on-site assessments, a lot of those can be efficiently applied to broad populations of your customer groups. It gives you credit for asking for their input. Obviously, you lose that credit pretty quickly if they give you your input and you don't do anything with it. But just asking for their input up front usually gets you credit. You get even more credit for fixing when they tell you that they're having a problem with you or that they're unhappy about something. And the other big benefit about level one voice of the customer initiatives is that usually they're pretty quantifiable. So they're easy to measure. They usually result in metrics or several metrics that you can track and assess the severity of risks or measure your progress over time. There are some limitations to level one, though. For the most part, level one doesn't really deal effectively with the fact that your customer is not just a buyer. It's not just a procurement department. It's not just a decision maker. Your customer is actually a number of layers and a number of players that either touch or are touched by your organization's products, services, and people. So the total customer experience is a host of people in the customer company, in the customer organization. And the problem is that so many voice of the customer initiatives just touch one point. And most typically they touch either the sale transaction point, which is the buyer and the seller, or they touch the service transaction point, which can be a number of different people. But the key is there are various players that are impacted by you, by your company, as they experience your product or services or people. And any one of those players can have a voice in the decision whether to buy your services, whether to keep your services, or whether to shop for somebody else's services or products. Every one of those players have their own view about what easy to do business with is. Every one of those players have their own view about what value means. So every one of those players represent a touch point or a relationship that can be fostered, leveraged, and actually capitalized on from a profit standpoint. The problem is most level 1 efforts treat the relationship like those two figures up in the top right-hand corner under your company. There's a buyer and a seller. Really, level 2 takes you to a fabric of relationships, which is the bottom diagram on the bottom right there. It's a lot easier for a competitor to break that single bond up above than it is to break that fabric of bonds down below. And that's really what level 2 is all about. Level 2 turns 1 or 2 touch points into 7, 8, or 9, or 10, or however many touch points there are that represent the entire customer's experience. And to do that requires engagement that goes much further than surveys. It requires engagement that goes much further than most of the typical voice of the customer efforts and techniques that a lot of companies use. And there's a lot of discussion in the book around those. But the key point here is for level 2 and for engaging your customers is to engage them at more points of relationships, more points of connection in their organization, and to engage them in much more meaningful ways, go beyond their input, and actually get their involvement in discussions. And there are a lot of great examples in the book, but 2 of them just to sort of give you a flavor. One is Wachovia. Wachovia has a very fully developed voice of the customer initiative with various types of surveys, both episode surveys and transaction relationship surveys. But they also supplement their survey process with over 300,000 interviews that are conducted by third parties every year. So again, they're trying to go from that touch point input to a more substantive dialogue. Now that's a big company. That's Wachovia. Lord knows how many employees and what kind of capital they've got invested in this process. You don't have to be a big company to do these things. I mean, Stoner Inc. is another great example. Stoner is a small company, small manufacturer of lubricants and coating products, 50 employees. They too have a fairly structured customer satisfaction survey process, but they follow up every week with detailed, substantive phone conversations with current, past, and prospective customers. So again, the point here is to get beyond the input into more substantive dialogues. To do that, you need more people involved. Your service department simply can't do that all by themselves. Let's see where I am here. So you need more people involved. And a lot of times, typical voice of the customer initiatives, level 1 initiatives, strictly ride on the backs of the service and support staff, your customer care, your customer call center, your customer support people. And if you really are going to engage the customer at multiple touch points in a much more substantive dialogue, you simply need more people involved. And that's where level 2 opportunities, level 2 focus comes into play. Level 2 is all about creating reasons to talk to your customers in a lot more detail around what value means to them. Again, not just the buyer, not just the service receiver, but various players, various influencers throughout the customer's experience and throughout the customer's organization. Every one of those touch points has what we call a point of parity, a point of differentiation, and a unique value proposition. And we need to find those. And that's what level 2 initiatives are all about. And if you're going to be good at that, you need to involve a lot more of your people. So that's why employee engagement becomes very, very important. And a couple key points here on employee engagement. I always get a fair amount of eyebrows at a minimum and pushback, ideally, when we talk about this. Number 1 is we really expect every single employee in a company to play a role in the company's customer focus. And I get pushback a lot from companies that say, well, Bill, that's not practical. There are just some roles in our organization that don't have anything to do with the customer's experience. And I really push back on that, because if you can really find a role in your organization that doesn't somehow impact the customer's experience, then there's three things we suggest you do with it. You either automate it, or you outsource it, or you eliminate it, because it's a job that's simply not adding value to your economic growth model. So the key is to create opportunities that everybody can play a role in, provide and promote those opportunities, and then celebrate about them. And there are a lot of examples in the book, but a couple really quick ones that I think resonate well with a lot of people when we talk to them. Everybody's familiar with Ritz-Carlton and the great things they do around customer service, and the great things that they do to create loyal customers. Some people are familiar with 12 service values, but not a lot of people are familiar with what Ritz-Carlton does on an ongoing basis to keep their people engaged. Each day there's something called the daily lineup. And in addition to talking about any priorities or housekeeping or operating priority for the day, activities for the day, another thing that each daily lineup covers is something called the wow story. And that's where one employee in that hotel will share an example of how they wowed a customer. So one example that I think is pretty powerful was the family arrived at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Bali, and they had been traveling with a young child who had some serious food allergies. So they traveled with special allergy-specific food, milk, and eggs for the child. And when they landed and got to the Ritz-Carlton, they found that their special food and eggs had spoiled. So the hotel manager and the head chef scour the Bali area to try to find a store that sold these special eggs and milk, and couldn't find one. So the head chef ultimately remembers a little specialty food store in Singapore that offers specialty foods for allergic-stricken people, and calls to make sure that that particular store does in fact have the special eggs and milk that this family needed, and had his mother-in-law buy the milk and eggs in Singapore, jump on an airplane, and fly those milk and eggs to this family that was staying at the Ritz-Carlton in Bali. Now, that's a level of engagement. That's a commitment to making the customer happy and exceeding the customer's expectations that employee in Bali took on their own. A manager at Ritz-Carlton can spend up to $5,000 to risk losing a guest. A line employee can spend up to $2,000 to risk losing a guest. Now, our CFOs in our organizations are going to raise an eyebrow and say, "Oh my gosh, how can we let people control that kind of money?" Well, you need parameters, you need guidelines, and you need to train the people on how to make good decisions. But that's the right way the customer-focused companies engage their employees. Another good example that's detailed a lot in the book is Commerce Bank, that was headquartered in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and they've since been bought by a Canadian bank. But they do some incredible things. They too have a wow your customer approach. So they have wow awards. They even have a wow patrol that visits the different branches on a weekly basis. And each branch is going to get visited by this secret wow patrol at least weekly. And the role of the wow patrol is to go through the bank, sort of act like a mystery shopper, mystery visitor, and actually rate the bank on how the employees engage the customers. And pretty tactical kinds of things, everything from how the employee shook hands with the visitor, to how they greeted them, the words they used, the facial expressions, very, very tactile kinds of things. The other interesting thing about Commerce Bank is they have something called Kill a Stupid Rule program. And if an employee could identify a Commerce Bank rule or policy that prevents them from wowing a customer, they're supposed to bring it to management's attention, and management will pay them cash for raising and hopefully helping them kill the stupid rule. So just different ways to engage your employees, and the extremes that some companies will go through to make that happen. So at level 2, if you're engaging in a much more substantive way and you're involving a lot more people on both sides of the relationship, customer side and the supplier side, it's going to take new skills. And that's where training and tools come into play. And there's a lot of time dedicated to this in the book. But your employees are going to need new skills to learn how to make better decisions, to learn how to react to different customer situations, to learn how to implement your customer-focused priorities. Even the customers are going to need new skills to take advantage of some of the things you're offering and some of the things you're trying to do on their behalf. So training and tools is very, very important. Again, there's a lot of information in the book around that. But I find this to be a very pivotal piece, because you can't expect people to change the way they behave or the way they perform without giving them the tools to do it. Process orientation is the sixth one. Very, very important here, and this has a couple different pieces of importance to it, or aspects of importance to it. One is that customer focus is a process. It's not an event. And when we let people treat it as an event, the results are pretty much going to be uneventful. And we need a process orientation, because we need to understand that this is something that never ends. There's no ending point to customer focus, because your customer situation, there's churn, you're going to get new customers, you're going to lose customers, customers' markets are going to change, their needs are going to change, what they look to you for is going to change. So this is an ever-evolving process. And a lot of people look at me and say, well, when will this be done? Well, it's not done. That's why we want to make sure you get your head around the idea that it's a process. It's a never-ending journey, really. A couple other pieces of importance around this whole process idea. We want, as much as we can, we want our employees to understand why their jobs exist. We want them to understand why the company exists. And both of those exist to create value in the marketplace for our customers. So this whole idea of process modeling, or being able to show people the flow of your business, can help employees understand. We're not talking about making financial experts or process engineer experts out of them, but just helping them have a fundamental understanding of why their jobs exist, how the company makes money, how we pay employee earnings from that money, how the customers spend impacts those earnings, and how the employee's performance impacts the customer spend. It's all very related, and process mapping can be very useful at a very fundamental level of helping employees understand why we exist. And at the other end, the more extreme, more tactical and technical spectrum, any kind of customer focus is going to revolve around some degree of process improvement, whether it's fixing processes that aren't working well, whether it's connecting processes that aren't connected with each other very well, or it might even be aligning your processes with customer processes. But process improvement, process documentation ends up being a key part of this. So it ends up being an important pillar or success factor for the overall customer-focused journey. Joint workouts, I mentioned earlier, this is pretty much the turning point. This is where we'll see level 2 organizations take their collaboration with their customers from a current day problem solving, problem resolution, let's fix this, let's improve this kind of mode, to a future forward looking, what's coming down the pike, what are the threats and opportunities to your business, what might that mean in the way we can help you succeed. So it's really creating ways to team with the customer that looks forward. And you can only do that once you've got your current situation fixed and working like a well-oiled machine for them. So there's a good example in the book around this. PPG Industries, the fiberglass products group, was working with a automobile parts manufacturer. And PPG was developing the auto parts maker was developing a fiberglass reinforced suspension spring. And PPG was creating a piece of fiberglass that had to be bonded to that plastic part. And no matter what PPG made the fiberglass piece according to specs, and it was testing well in their plants, and et cetera. But no matter what the auto part manufacturer did, when they tried to bond PPG's fiberglass piece to their spring, the bonding process was failing. PPG couldn't figure out what was going on in their labs, in their plants, and the auto parts maker couldn't figure it out in their plant. So the two teams got together and they came up with a pretty unusual agreement. The PPG would recreate the part maker's proprietary bonding process within PPG's facility, and then they would work together to test different fiberglass components using the bonding process to see what was causing the breakdown and what conditions needed to exist for it to work. So it took some time. The two teams got their heads together. They worked quite hard on it, but they were able to ultimately succeed in creating a bond that worked. And not only did it work for that part and for that automobile that it was planned for, but it went on to be used in additional automobile models that weren't initially anticipated. So it's still a current problem that they intended to fix, and they worked jointly to fix it, but it had forward-looking ramifications and implications to it, which I think are pretty meaningful there. So help you see a little bit more about what we're talking about when we say joint workouts. As you get into level 2, maybe even as you exit level 1, you are not going to be lacking for things to do. There are going to be many, many opportunities for you to take your customer's experience to the next level. Many opportunities for you to convert unsatisfied and satisfied customers into loyal ones. So you're going to have a wish list that's really, really long, and it's much more than you're going to be able to tackle. So an important piece around this whole process orientation is, do you have a process for prioritizing? Do you have some process that you're going to follow to take all the things on your long list of to-dos and figure out which ones you tackle first? Which ones have the most ROI associated with them? So there's a tool in the book called the Value Driver Decision Matrix that kind of walks you through at least one approach companies can use to help them prioritize and evaluate where to start. These last three pieces here, capacity for change, consequences, and committed leadership, they're all pieces of level 3, and I'm going to sort of address them together here as we wind down to the last several minutes here of our time together. Again, level 3 is a culture-oriented level. It's how we leverage that culture both inside and outside of the organization. And there are 4 key components to it. The first component to it is what we call a value creation mindset. And there's a couple key points here to sort of underscore or demonstrate that. The first point is there's only one customer. We hear, and I personally get frustrated with companies who use terms like internal customer and external customer. Nothing could be more confusing. Nothing can be more divisive. There's one customer. It's the customer at the end of the day that pays for your products and services. Sam Walton said, there is only one boss. It's the customer. And he can fire everybody in the company from the chairman on down simply by spending his money somewhere else. So the first piece to this value creation mindset is there's one customer and there's only one company. When you ask your employees to define their jobs, do they define what they do in terms of a job description? Or do they identify with their manager that they work for? Do they identify with this department or functional area they work in? Or do they identify with the company? We were working with a company in the Gulf Coast who was working on the oil well spill that we had a couple years ago. And they were making one very specialized part that went on to some equipment that was being used in the water purification and recovery system. So one of the things we were doing, we had focus groups of these employees for this company in a room, and we were trying to get them to tell us, what they do in their jobs and how they think it impacts the customer. And we were actually just listening to them one by one, and there were some pretty hardcore people in the room. And there were some people in the room, with torn clothes on. They still had their fire retardant camis on. They had hard hats, hard shoes on, goggles. So there were some pretty roughneck kinds of folks in the room. And we asked all of them to tell us what their jobs were, and they told us until we got to the next to the last guy in the room. And I asked him what his job is, and he says, Mr. Thomas, my job is to help this company clean up the Gulf. That's what we mean by one company. That's what we mean by one purpose. What do your people identify with? At Walt Disney World, there's 2,000 different job descriptions, but they all have the same single purpose, and that's to create satisfied customers. So the way we talk, the way we think, the way we prioritize all helps to create or not create this value creation mindset that's so important for culture. The next piece, ask, act, and align, has a couple components to it. Number one, asking questions is not my right. I don't have the permission to do it. As an employee, I actually should have an obligation to ask questions. And Harley Davidson a couple years ago had some really well-documented examples out there. They actually made intellectual curiosity one of their 5 corporate values. And Richard Teerlink was the chairman at the time, and Teerlink said all of our employees have to be willing and have to feel obligated to question why things are done. No question is a bad question. No question is a question that you have no business asking. So we want people being inquisitive. Some of the folks on the line today may have heard of the customer's chair that was a documented example in Siemens. It's another way, constantly asking what the customer is going to think of our discussion here today, of the decision we're about to make here today. And there's some information in the book about that customer's chair story. Not only do you need to ask the right questions and feel an obligation to ask them, but you need to act on what you learn. And I thought, this not as business related as it might be, but something that really happened a couple years ago really drove this home for me. The 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing, the U.S. men's court volleyball team actually won the gold medal. And they weren't given a prayer's chance to even make it into the quarterfinals, much less win the gold. And the coach of the team at that time was Hugh McCutcheon. And they hadn't won a gold medal in 20 years, but these reporters, after the gold was awarded to the USA, these reporters were around them, and they were talking to him, and one of the reporters said, Coach McCutcheon, nobody gave this team a prayer to even be in the finals, much less beat Brazil for the gold. What do you think was the key to their success? And he thought for a minute, and then he said, it was their ability to learn. They took each game one at a time, they learned from it, and they applied those learnings to the next one. They truly learned how to win. And that's what our culture has to be for our customer focus. We need to ask questions of each other, of our leaders, of our customers. We need to act on what we learn by asking those questions. And then we need to align our behaviors. We need to make sure we're all doing the things that get what the customers asked for, or what our leaders want us to do to serve those customers and create more value for those customers. So we need to ask, we need to act so that we can learn to win. And the last point there, building organization-wide alignment, kind of goes with those first two, but just one quick personal example. I was with Dell Computers for a while, and one of my biggest ahas or painful learnings when I joined Dell was when we sat down at a staff meeting at Dell, there were no safe domains. Even though I was considered to be a human resources expert initially or a customer experience expert later on, anybody sitting around that table not only had permission, but they were expected to ask questions of me about my area. So, a lot of times people sit back and say, oh, well, that's his area or that's her area. I don't want to, poke, show some vulnerability here or question his authority or question his knowledge. Well, an organization-wide alignment means we all ask each other questions. We all challenge each other on questions. We don't take anything for granted. The third piece there is that internal management system. And there's really a lot here. I'm going to fly through this very quickly, but there's at least a chapter, maybe a chapter and a half in the book that deals with this internal management system. And essentially it's talking about 3 key things you need to manage to get to level 3 of your customer focus. One is your capacity for change. One is managing performance. And the other one is managing your talent. This model is taken from the book, and again, as I mentioned on a couple other items, there's a lot of detail in the book. But really, you have to look at what kind of change you're asking your organization to make to reach this next level of customer focus. Is it incremental? Is it substantive? Or is it transformational? And you also have to think about what's our history? What's our track record in terms of dealing with change or changing to things? Are we pretty much a reactive kind of organization that we respond and we're nimble and we land on our feet? Or are we proactive where we actually anticipate changes that are coming and we're ready before they get there? Or are we actually competitive where we're creating the changes that the rest of the marketplace has to react or anticipate? So again, there's a lot of information in the book about how to plot yourself on that graph, and it kind of helps you understand the level of effort that might be required. Managing performance, when an individual performs or does not perform the way you want them to, it will always be for one of 4 reasons. Either they lack the clarity, they lack the skill, they lack the will, or they lack the support. Human performance and behavior is no more difficult or complicated than this. So if somebody's not performing or embracing this change the way you want them to, the first thing they ask is, were they clear about what I expected? The next thing they ask is, well, maybe they knew what we expected and what their role was, but maybe they're not able to do it yet. Maybe we haven't given them the skill. I might know what you want. I might have the ability to do it, but I might not want to do it. That's the will piece. I might not be as excited about this customer-focused thing that you guys are getting all jazzed up about. So I might know what you want. I might be able to do it. I might want to do it, but something else might be blocking me from doing it. Something else might be interfering that I don't have any control over. That's the support piece. Again, a very, very useful tool that we have seen line managers use in all kinds of organizations to manage performance and change, and more details about that in the book. The last piece of this internal management system is how you manage your talent. You've got two parts of your world. One is the customer part on the right side, and the other is the employee part on the left side that serves those customers, that creates product for those customers, that sells to those customers, supports those customers. And they really are two very parallel worlds. So if you look at the top of that left-hand column there, the blue box, your talent management life cycle, that's all the things you do to attract, acquire, develop, retain, exit your people. And you have similar processes for all those different kinds of events in terms of your customers. And what's striking to us is how parallel the things that we need to do with our customers are to the things that we should be doing to our employees. So some interesting parallels there, a lot of traction that you can create in terms of the way you manage talent and align it with your customer focus. The key point is every decision you make about your people, your employees, your managers on the left-hand side is going to impact your ability to perform with your customers on the right-hand side. And then the last piece is leveraging the value chain. Again, we kind of talked a couple times or mentioned a couple times about the real value being to take this beyond your customers and take it to your broader value chain. So there's a couple things that are an important piece to finalizing your level 3 progress. One is leveraging the loyalty that you currently have from your customers and your employees. Even though your employees and customers are loyal to you, do they know what you expect them to be doing with that loyalty? Do you know what you hope that loyalty translates into? Many, many times they don't know. Customers might view themselves as loyal, but they don't know what we really expect from them as a loyal customer. So we need to tell them. Now, that takes some finesse to do, and there's some good guidance in the book that helps you do that, but we need to tell them. Increase the teaming and now elevate it to a level of partnering. Now, we get a lot of pushback on this one from hardcore line people that say, Bill, our customers don't want partners. They just want a product that meets their specs, meets their price point, gets to them when we told it would, and doesn't break before our trucks leave their loading docks. Well, you know what? I don't buy that, folks. Companies, if you ask them, do they want their suppliers to be partners, they're going to tell you no for any host of reasons. But when you ask them what other value they look for their suppliers to bring, they will open up a box of opportunity that is mind-numbing sometimes. So we might not think they want partnering. They might not think they want partnering or need partnering, but they are definitely looking for and open to value beyond the transaction. And we need to discover what that is, and that's what level 3 is about. And then finally, extend those practices to the broader value chain, and there are some good examples in the back in the last chapter of the book that talk about going beyond your current customers, going beyond even into your supply chain to really leverage the economic benefits that you can get from a level 3 culture. So Andrew, I think I can turn it back to you. Hopefully I've left you some time to do that.
We do. We have a little bit of time remaining for question and answer. And if we have a number of questions come in, we'll stay on just a little bit beyond the top of the hour to make sure that everyone's questions are answered. And you can submit those questions by using the chat function down in that lower left corner. Just type your question in and click send to send it to us. Bill, let's start with a question about changing demands on the part of customers. One person asked that his company provides a variety of products to customers, but it's been difficult to keep focus with continually changing demands. How do you drive a consistent focus on a customer base that seems to have continual changes?
And it's a good question, Andrew, and not an easy answer. I think two keys come into play. One is segmenting the customer base again. So you've got to prioritize, and even though you've got a customer base that's constantly changing in their demands, you simply can't, and in my view, you shouldn't expect yourself to change for all of them and to be nimble Johnny on the spot for all of them. So let's pick some. And maybe it's 1%. Maybe it's 1%. Maybe it's the top 5 customers in a particular segment or a particular space. Let's stay really, really close to them and really see if we can't be nimble with them. The other thing is that companies that have a lot of product innovation, companies like Gillette and Nike and Microsoft even, that's what makes product pipelines so important. You might know what a customer's new need is, and you might not be able to get to that need right away. But if you've got a pipeline that's continuously testing the market for those needs, then you can go to that pipeline, prioritize them, and say, okay, based on what we've seen over the last 3 months or 6 months, this one's definitely the next unanswered need out there. Let's see if we can't put some resources behind that.
Let's look at the topic of leadership versus the way customer engagement is handled. Someone asked about leadership incentives that are aligned more with customer growth rather than customer engagement. That type of culture tends to affect the commitment of leadership in how they handle customers. What do you think can be done to clarify that, to make it more connected to engagement rather than just simply be a numbers game of increasing customer growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there are some companies out there, that have made some good progress in there. IBM and the insurance folks, USAA. There's a couple examples in the book that kind of speak to that. But the quickest answer is to steer away from one metric sort of incentives. And the most effective way to get them focusing not just on the end result or not just on share of wallet growth or not just on margin growth, but also some of the qualitative or softer things like customer engagement, is to tie their incentive to an index. So an index might track a couple of things. Some of those things might be hard, tangible financial indicators, but some of them might be more qualitative voice of the customer kinds of indicators. So we've got one customer that uses a customer engagement index plus their customer loyalty, which is sort of a derivative of NPS, plus 2 economic indicators as a customer focus index that they tie their leadership's incentives to.
And I hope that part of the answer that Bill gave there addresses some of the audience members that have been asking about specific metrics or methods to measure customer experience and also ways to track customer engagement. Because we'd had a few people ask about ideas about specific metrics and whether or not there's a way that you can use a tool to create the kind of alignment that you need to accomplish some of the ideas you're talking about. And the example someone gave was Lean Six Sigma. Can you talk about that a bit? Can you say about specific tools or models that you think can help to make the process happen?
Give me one more little second click on it, Andrew. To make what process happen?
To be able to connect people more, connect the company more with its customers, and to get that internal organization aligned with the idea of increased customer engagement.
There is a section in the book that talks about choosing metrics that matter, and there's 2 faces to that coin. One is identifying the metrics that matter to us as a supplier, and the other one is choosing metrics that matter the most to the customer. And I think if the readers that are interested in that can kind of go into that piece of the book, it's really early in the book. I think you'll see some really good insights and some questions to start thinking about so that you can align around and sort of come to a confluence of metrics that make sense for both internally and externally monitoring your progress.
We'll do 2 more questions before we wrap up here. The next question is about working with employees. What, in your opinion, is the best way to measure and reward employees that are helping to drive customer loyalty?
Well, I'd probably boil it down to two. One is it's not the financial aspect at all. Companies really get sort of preoccupied with the power of the dollar, and while financial rewards are very, very important, non-financial indicators, non-financial drivers are huge. And I mean, at Dell, I tell people at Dell, we had 101 ways to recognize you without spending a penny. And they were all awesome. They were all very, very effective. So one piece of the answer is to think really creatively about ways to recognize contribution, to celebrate it, to showcase it. And there are a lot of examples. There have to be 7 or 8 non-financial incentive and recognition examples that are detailed in the book. The second piece is more of a financial one, and there are a lot of options that are discussed in the book. The one I like the most, though, and a lot of organizations don't like this, but I do, and if you don't like it, I'd like the chance to talk you into liking it because I think it's the best, and that is giving each employee their own personal goal that ties directly to your customer focus, and then measuring part of their performance and reward at the end of the year on their achievement of that goal. Now that sounds very difficult to do, but at the end of the day, many, many companies do it almost on a daily basis.
I will take one final question, and it concerns creating reasons to speak to customers. Can you give an example of a way that someone was able to create additional reasons to interact with customers? And in line with that, who on the side of the vendor is the person who should be involved in initiating that dialogue?
Okay. Let me give you one real-time example, and I say real-time because we're working with it right now. One of the organizations that we've worked with for a while has a biannual customer survey that they send out to 1 or 2 contact points in each of their customer companies. So this is going to be typically a buyer or a procurement person and one other person who might be, in this company's situation, a plant manager or an asset manager or a facility manager, or a geography manager. But anyhow, they send the biannual survey out to 2 contact points at each customer company. Based on the results of those surveys, and that's the same set of survey questions for all of those companies, based on the results of that biannual survey, this particular organization goes through the results and they'll prioritize what seem to be the hot areas. So for example, let's say that biannual survey revealed that a large number of companies or a significant number of companies are having trouble with this company's order entry system. Just not user-friendly, not working well, not accurate, whatever it might be. But the biannual survey surfaces the fact that order entry might be a problem. What this organization then does is they'll send a order entry specific survey out with very specific, very targeted order entry kinds of questions to the people that are responsible for order entry and order fulfillment in the customer organization. That survey is very targeted, very focused, very much in that customer employee's best interest to kind of answer. They then use the results of that very targeted order entry specific survey to go out and actually talk with various members of the customer organization. So what they'll do is they'll take a team of, this particular organization likes to limit its team to 2 or 3 people, but they'll take 2 or 3 people. It might be an IT person, it might be a fulfillment and billing person, it might be somebody from customer care, but they'll take 2 or 3 people and they'll actually go and visit the customer and say, we'd like to spend an hour or 2 with 2 or 3 people on your side that are having fits over our order entry system to see if we can't work on some ideas together. So that's an example of where they've taken a biannual sort of macro level survey and turned it to an individual discussion point and opportunity. Does that make sense?
Well, it's a process that will require some additional study and a good deal of work, but the results of that effort are fantastic for those that pursue it. Bill Thomas, thank you again so much for being with us today on Soundview Live.
My pleasure, Andrew.